A few years ago, as I was reading an article, I came across a mind-opening quote by Einstein that concisely explained for me what learning truly is. And ever since meditating on that line, my approach to learning has been radically reformed. So here's the quote. The mind that opens to a new idea never returns to its original size. It's funny that as you're hearing this line and contemplating on its meaning, the same thing is happening with your mind. But what if you just took it superficially and didn't understand its full implication for the real world? What if you just memorized the line and thought that you've gained a new piece of knowledge because now you have one more quote in your toolbox that you can throw into any intellectual conversations you might partake in? The truth is, that's how we normally treat any piece of information we receive. We don't usually go out of our way to see what it means in our own experiences. We just blindly take it in. And sometimes we don't even question its validity. And that's why we don't make it to the second part of the line, because we haven't fulfilled the first part, which says the mind that opens to a new idea. Opening to the idea requires deliberate practice and effort. It requires struggle and engagement of multiple parts of your brain, and normally we don't open our mind to anything. We just tumble down the path of least resistance and drill the information into our brain without a network to stand on. It's brain survival mechanism that drives us toward the path of least resistance. The default mode of the brain reinforces low effort choices. In other words, our brain chooses to be shallow and not get too focused on anything because it's wired to minimize effort to conserve energy, and it makes a ton of sense because choosing the easiest path reduces cognitive strain, aligning with brain's biological preference for efficiency. And the reason we find ourselves resorting to the same learning approach every single time is because the brain's default mode favors familiar, low-effort actions because they're perceived as safer. And that's the reason behind so many destructive behaviors we find ourselves indulging in. Infamous behaviors like procrastination, shallow learning, scrolling, multitasking, you name it. Almost all the known vices that exist in our day-to-day struggle comes down to the default system of the brain. But we can always rewire the brain to get rid of its existing pattern and create an entirely new pattern of behaviors, to install a new approach to acquiring knowledge in our mind, which I'll be discussing in this video. See, it's self-evident to me that the skill of learning is the one inevitable skill you need in order to master all the other existing skills that your life will require of you at one point or another. Whether it be in academia, business, social dynamics, politics, psychology, industry, creative endeavors, any skill in any category, in any walks of life requires a certain approach to unlock it. And that approach can either make the process of skill acquisition smooth and frictionless, or it can add to your burden and make it almost impossible to attain the feeblest access to that skill. Or the approach can drop somewhere in between those two extremes, which I'd say is where the average learner lands on. So the only reasonable first step would be to begin with mastering the art of learning. When we say learning, we mostly conjure up a picture of us having the process cemented in our hippocampus. But real learning changes you as a person. It reforms your identity and inserts a radical shift in your perception of reality. If you're learning in an actual sense, you're becoming an independent and original thinker. These two are tightly tied together and cannot exist without each other. Let me give you an example of some of the real learning that we have all experienced in our lives. Take the theory of relativity, for example. Learning about time dilation or how gravity warps time, which if you watched Interstellar, you probably have experienced it to some extent. It's obvious that it changed how you look at the concept of time forever. Or take the mind-bending revelation of quantum physics. Wasn't it so transformative in your perception of reality? Did you not look at the nature of the world with a hue of mystery after that? Or in psychology, for example, learning about your mind and how it alters reality based on its content has probably made you experience a radical existential shift in your perception of reality. These are all examples of actual learning. Learnings that shapes your belief system. They don't exist as mere facts. They become a part of your mind and the lens through which it operates. Real learning terminates a part of your mind and replaces it with a new part. And you don't remember these learning experiences being a laborious process. You were simply amazed by the mere understanding of these jaw-dropping phenomena. Your curiosity was all-encompassing and subconsciously driving the experience forward. Unlike the traditional educational system that you must go through a torturous process of inscribing information into your cerebrum. Instead, you're having a revelatory experience that adds fuel to your curiosity even further. And learning becomes like a video game. You unlock one level and it gives you a boost for unlocking another level. You see the story unfolding in front of you and you want to know what happens in the next season, almost like watching a movie, to a point that it becomes an obsession. That's why I think this quote from Feynman explains perfectly how we should go about learning. Study hard what interests you most, in the most undisciplined, irreverent, and original manner possible. The physicist Richard Feynman himself pursued science like it was a machine to fix, like it was a puzzle to solve. It was not a chore for him. It was not something he had to study hard to get a great job or get fame or to win the Nobel Prize and whatnot. Those were the least of his focus. He pursued science purely because he was curious about the nature of this awe-inspiring world we reside in. And contrary to what we have experienced in school, learning is intrinsically fun. Because like you said, if you're not having fun, you're not learning. There's a pleasure in finding things out. The act of learning involves more creation than the spineless mind-numbing fact consumption. That's why Einstein famously said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And the reason we find learning draining and tiresome is because we are not using our creative power. And once we do, our passion for learning will spin out of control. So if you are in pursuit of expanding your understanding of reality, it's better to deeply think about it in your own terms. And the only way we get to do that is either through applying it and interacting with it in the physical realm, or you can communicate that understanding to another person to elaborate on it with your own definition. And the premise to all these techniques is to connect the new idea to an existing web of ideas that you have interacted with previously. But the question remains, what system can we build to incorporate these elements into our day-to-day learning process? The system I'm about to introduce consists of 5 stages. The first step involves identifying a problem. You have to clarify why you want to learn and what goal you aim to achieve. Once you define that, you create a structured project around that problem. A project serves as a solution framework with distinct boundaries, a defined beginning and end. And to ensure effectiveness, you must also establish clear objectives, which is your measurable outcomes, methodology, which is the specific steps and processes for executing that idea, resources, which is the required budget, tools, materials you use throughout the whole project, timeline, which is the realistic schedule with milestones. So this structured approach transforms your abstract learning goals into actionable results-driven work. And the reason it works stems from brain's innate drive to solve problems. When you present it with a clearly defined challenge, it will dedicate remarkable focus and energy to finding solutions. And again, we're tapping into brain's natural wiring. The survival instinct of the brain prioritizes problem over anything else. Our nature is goal-oriented. We're always chasing goals. Even idleness is a goal-oriented behavior set by default. So either let the default take the wheel or hop into the driver's seat and steer it into the right direction consciously. Because no matter who's driving, there's always a destination. You either end up in the gutter or you reach out to the light. The choice is yours. Put differently, if you don't deliberately channel your intellect into meaningful challenges, it will invent its own. Left idle, that brilliant mind of yours will become a factory of overthinking, anxiety, and cheap distractions, all counterfeit problems designed just to stay busy. This is why you must keep a project in motion at all times, not as a luxury but as a lifeline. Your focus craves a worthy target. Your energy demands a purpose to burn. And life demands multiple projects to be running at all times for every area of life. But there must be a uniting focus, a highlighted project that takes up the majority of your mental power and connects all the other projects together. These projects are oriented in a hierarchical way. To give a broad picture of how you can apply this project-based approach to your growth in life, we need to put life into 3 different categories. A project for the health of the body, which can include exploring different diets, learning about the biology of the body, educating yourself on fitness and different training exercises. One for the mind and developing it, which includes mental strength, thinking skills, as well as your spiritual growth and strengthening your faith. And one for your career and professional enhancement. And again, goals and directions are dangerously powerful because they determine your perception at any given moment. And your thoughts flow like molten metal into the mold of your chosen aims. Now that you have a project to focus on, your mind keeps working on it in the background. Even during breaks, walks, or conversations with family members, your mind is connecting the dots. This means progress isn't limited to active work sessions. Your rest time also fuels ideas and development. In fact, you might make even more breakthroughs when stepping away. Think of it like muscle growth. When you work out, you strain your muscles, but they only grow stronger during rest. The same applies to work and learning. As a student or someone who's working on a project, you might grind for hours and absorb information and struggle through tough sections, yet it's often during downtime that everything clicks. And when you return back to your work, everything suddenly makes sense just because your mind has been working in the background. And there's a compelling neuroscience behind these aha moments that occur during rest. Research shows that neural reorganization and memory consolidation primarily happen during periods of rest, which occurs in two key forms. The first form of resting is wakeful rest, which is also called NSDR, standing for non-sleep deep rest. It includes activities like those tiny insignificant moments in between your work or study when you look away and rest your eyes on the tree outside of the window and stretch your arms. That's actually very specific because that applies to me. But it also includes activities like mindful walking, daydreaming, or meditation, where your brain enters a relaxed yet alert state. And in my personal experience, taking a walk in nature is an excellent example of wakeful rest. It creates the ideal conditions for diffuse thinking while maintaining mild physical activity that stimulates brain function. The second type of rest is sleep rest, particularly REM sleep, because during REM sleep, the brain actively processes and integrates information. And Harvard research demonstrates that REM sleep boosts creative insight by up to 33% compared to wakefulness. Okay, so now that you've outlined the project, now the real work begins. It's time to familiarize yourself with the subject, to get a decent grasp of the broader picture, to discover what you don't know, to shed light on the unknown lands. But it's the tricky part because the majority gets stuck here. Instead of jumping headfirst into action and getting a first-hand feel of what they're dealing with, they resort to passive consumption of information which only provides a second-hand understanding. They research excessively. They're so hesitant to act because they don't feel ready yet. After all, they just started the project. How could they possibly go about solving the problem, right? Well, wrong. Because if you don't fail, you never discover what you don't know. Clarity emerges out of action, not contemplation. Think of failures and mistakes as priming your mind for learning. When you struggle, your brain recognizes the relevance of input, much like a lock and key mechanism. Without the right shape, knowledge won't attach. Also, like how insulin plays a crucial role in facilitating the entry of glucose from the bloodstream into cells. Failures and mistakes are crucial components for absorption of knowledge. When you don't make mistakes, your brain can't retain the information. Exactly like how your cells are not going to be able to absorb glucose when you're running low on insulin. And again, failure triggers your survival instinct, making your brain hungry for solutions. So what if you set a goal to fail multiple times a day? Not catastrophic, irreversible failures, but small, deliberate missteps that stretch your mind beyond its current capacity. Try solving a problem even if you know you can't. Give a wrong answer just to engage with the challenge. Push yourself into uncomfortable effort. Because if you're not failing at least once a day, it means you're not going far enough. Thus, you're not truly growing, or your growth rate is infinitesimally slow. Remember, each failure is a lesson in disguise. And history's greatest innovators didn't avoid mistakes, they sought them out. I'm sure that you've heard of the Richard Feynman quote, which says, "You must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." See, without failure, you deceive yourself into thinking you know more than you do. Only by facing the unknown, you get to confront your true gaps. And Albert Einstein said, "A person who never made a mistake never tried anything new." And he also said, "The only source of knowledge is experience," which is something we have just mentioned. Delving into action before you even go to consume knowledge about that specific subject you want to learn about. And Thomas Edison famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." And in summary, the most effective path is very simple. You just have to act, jump into the unknown, fail, discover what you don't know, learn, fill in the gaps, and repeat. So now we arrive at the third stage of the project-based learning. It's time to focus on finding the right information to fill in the gaps. But the key is knowing how to search for it. Instead of drowning in endless textbooks or random articles, you need to start from a general understanding and naturally work your way into finer bits of knowledge. Think of it like an oil painting. You don't just straight away jump into fine details, you start with broad strokes and slowly refine the painting. Let me give you a tangible example in how you can approach learning science. A bad approach would be like, I want to learn biology. Just jump straight into genetics, memorizing terms without any context. But a better approach would be like, I want to understand how to reduce inflammation in my body. Now you have a concrete project with direction. This way, you're not just passively absorbing information, you're actively solving a puzzle. And you have to follow the rabbit hole of curiosity. Once you have a central topic, let curiosity guide you. To give you my own personal example, at one point in my life, I struggled with minor health issues linked to inflammation. Instead of reading a biology textbook to figure out what to do with it, I treated it like a detective game. I asked what is inflammation, and then I came across immune system, and I figured out what it is and how it works. And then I came across metabolic issues like the role of mitochondria that plays in it. And then I stumbled into gut microbiome. And each answer led to new questions, creating a chain of related concepts, like unlocking levels in a video game. That's why we have to learn for understanding, not memorization. As Richard Feynman famously said, I learned very early the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Too often, traditional education forces us to memorize disconnected facts, like handing someone a jigsaw puzzle and saying, memorize these pieces, but never assemble them. No wonder we struggle to recall or apply knowledge later. Instead, we have to connect ideas to build a mental framework and asking why and how instead of just what. And then teaching what you learn, even if it's just to yourself, to solidify understanding. Learning should not feel like a chore. As Leonardo da Vinci put it, learning never exhausts the mind. The noblest pleasure is the joy of understanding. When you approach knowledge with curiosity, it becomes engaging. You stop forcing yourself to study and start wanting to explore. The scientist Rosalind Franklin put it perfectly. Science and everyday life cannot and should not be separated. Once you find the relation of what you're studying and your real life, your curiosity will go through the roof. But if you learn in fragments, you'll fumble when asked a simple question, muttering terms you don't fully grasp. Conversely, if you learn through structured exploration, you'll have an organized, interconnected web of knowledge, ready to retrieve and apply at any moment. Now that you've gained knowledge about the problem you've been exploring, it's time to cement that understanding. And the best way to do that is by sharing what you've learned. You must document your discovery so that you see the tangible results, and that encourages you to continue doing it in the future. The act of explaining something in your own words forces you to organize, simplify, and connect concepts. It deepens your grasp of the subject, and you don't need an audience to start documenting your learning and sharing it. You can start writing a blog post or a newsletter once a week, or create a video or podcast about it weekly, which is like quite ideal if you could do this. And by doing so, you are keeping a learning journal where you summarize key takeaways. And it's quite effective because of two factors. First, you're doing a retrieval practice. When you retrieve and rephrase information, you reinforce your memory. And secondly, it gives you a structure which will enforce momentum. You commit to a simple system like a weekly newsletter or a weekly video or a weekly podcast, whatever floats your boat. And that makes you want to go on weekly projects just because you want to add onto that library of knowledge in your own corner of the internet. And it will feel like a collage of information that you keep adding onto. I would recommend the book Show Your Work by Austin Kleon, which talks about this in length, and I would love to read a line from the book for you, which says, the best way to get started on the path of sharing your work is to think about what you want to learn and then make a commitment to learn it in front of the others. This mindset turns the internet into a public workshop, where sharing isn't self-promotion, but part of the learning process itself. Hoarding information without sharing or applying it leads to cognitive overload. It's like eating without digesting. The solution is to turn knowledge into action. Einstein put it perfectly. He said, Knowledge is experience. Everything else is just information. Learning isn't passive. If you study a gaming strategy but never change how you play, did you actually learn it? Steve Jobs was so famous for his learning in action approach, and he famously said, "Real learning comes from doing. You can't learn to swim by reading a book. You have to jump in the water." And in the end, it's all about maximizing your focus. It's about hacking your brain's engagement system by inserting the right code. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was useful and I didn't waste your time, hopefully. And if you learned something out of this, let me know, or you can comment your own approach in learning. I learn a lot from you guys. When you comment, I get to see so many different perspectives, and I don't get chained to my own limited experiences. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to talk about these important topics. So thank you for that, and I hope that you have a great week.